You know that moment when a giant, a corporation worth billions, suddenly goes quiet? Like, suspiciously quiet? That's exactly what happened inside Hybe's glass towers when one BTS member opened his mouth and said something nobody expected. Not a complaint. Not a resignation letter. A dream. Just a dream. But somehow, that dream sent shockwaves through one of the most powerful entertainment empires on the planet. We're talking about Hybe, the company that built BTS from a small basement in Seoul into a global phenomenon that sold out stadiums on every continent, broke streaming records that still haven't been touched, and turned 7 ordinary boys into cultural deities. So when that company starts sweating over one member's vision, you have to ask yourself, what exactly did he say? Was it too bold? Too revolutionary? Or was it the kind of dream that forces powerful people to look in the mirror and realize they might be standing in the way? Which BTS member had the audacity to dream something that massive? And more importantly, why did it scare them? Stay right here, because what you're about to find out changes everything you thought you knew. Number 7, Jimin, the dream that started with a goodbye. There's something deeply uncomfortable about watching a man smile while saying something that quietly breaks the system around him. And that's exactly the energy Kim Seokjin. The world knows him as Jin, the eldest of BTS, the guy with the windshield wiper laugh that could disarm a war, brought to the table when he started talking about what he actually wanted for his life after the military. Now, before we go any further, let's set the scene properly, because this story doesn't start in 2024 or even 2023. It starts way earlier, in a moment that most people glossed over because they were too busy crying over the fact that BTS announced their hiatus. Remember that? June 2022. The Festa dinner. The whole world thought it was just a heartfelt team celebration, a little emotional check-in between members who'd been running at full speed for nearly a decade without a real breath. But then the cameras kept rolling, and one by one, these 7 men who had given everything started cracking open. And Jin, of all people, was the one who said it with the calmest face. He talked about wanting time. Real time. Not idle time, not scheduled time, not Hybe-approved time. Time that belonged to him. And in an industry where artists are essentially living, breathing IP assets with tour schedules mapped out years in advance, that kind of statement from your oldest, most visibly public member, the face that sold millions in merchandise, the voice behind Epiphany, the guy fans literally called worldwide handsome with zero irony, that's not just a personal reflection. That's a business disruption. See, Jin wasn't just talking about rest. He was laying the groundwork for something larger. Something that the corporate structure of Hybe, with its quarterly earnings calls and its carefully constructed idol machine, was absolutely not prepared to accommodate. Jin's dream, the one he started articulating more clearly as his military service approached, wasn't just about acting, though that's part of it, and, honestly, the man has the face and the presence for it. Anyone who watched his cameo appearances or his variety performances knows this isn't wishful thinking. This is a legitimate lane. His dream was about authorship. About being the one who decides. Who decides the project, the tone, the timeline, the image. Not the A&R team. Not the marketing department. Not the executives sitting on the 15th floor deciding what version of Jin is most commercially viable this quarter. Him. Kim Seokjin. The actual human being. And here's where it gets genuinely fascinating from a business standpoint, because Hybe isn't some reckless startup, they're a publicly traded company. Hybe Corporation went public on the Korean Stock Exchange in October 2020, and a significant portion of their valuation is tied directly to BTS activity. When one member starts talking about personal ownership of his creative direction, about wanting to build something outside the idol framework, that conversation doesn't stay between friends at a dinner table. That conversation gets flagged, gets discussed in boardrooms, gets quietly analyzed by people whose entire job is to assess risk. And Jin's particular flavor of ambition is high risk in the most ironic way possible, not because he wants to destroy anything, but because he wants to build something with his own hands, and in doing so, he forces Hybe to confront a question they've been avoiding since the beginning. What happens when the product becomes a person who outgrows the product line? During his military service, Jin didn't go quiet. He kept communicating with fans through Weverse, kept that personality alive, kept that connection burning, and in doing so, he reminded everyone that Jin the person is more magnetic than Jin the idol packaging. When soldiers, literal South Korean conscript soldiers, are lined up to take photos with you during your military service, and it goes viral internationally, you've officially transcended the category they put you in. That's not idol power. That's cultural gravity. And when someone has that level of pull, independent of the machinery behind them, the machinery gets nervous. Because now they're not dealing with an artist who needs them to be seen. They're dealing with someone who could theoretically walk into any room in any industry and create his own gravity field. Jin's dream, measured, warm, and wrapped in that signature humor of his, is essentially a quiet revolution. Not the kind that burns things down. The kind that builds something new on the side, and suddenly everyone realizes the new thing is more interesting than the old thing. Hybe saw this coming. They had to. And the fact that they've been carefully, strategically positioning Jin's solo comeback post-military with such deliberate energy, the single releases, the brand deals, the curated public moments, tells you everything. They're not ignoring his dream. They're trying to contain it within a structure that still benefits them. Whether Jin lets that happen, that's the real story. And that story is still being written. Number 6. Jungkook, the golden dream that nobody could control. Let's talk about the most dangerous kind of person inside any system, not the rebel, not the troublemaker, not the one who kicks the door down. The most dangerous person is the one who is so good at everything the system requires that they no longer need the system to validate them. That person, in the universe of BTS and Hybe, is Jungkook. And if you think that's just fan hyperbole, let's look at the actual receipts, because this is not a story built on emotion alone. This is a story built on data, on patterns. On a young man who grew up inside one of the most controlled entertainment environments on Earth and slowly, methodically, almost invisibly, began to outgrow every box they built for him. Jungkook joined Big Hit Entertainment, the company that would later become Hybe, at 15 years old. 15. He was a kid from Busan who auditioned on a whim, who almost signed with a different company, who had no idea that the decision he made in that moment would eventually reshape the global music industry. And for years, he was the youngest, the most protected, the one the members shielded from the harshest realities of idol life. He was the magne, the baby, and the entire structure of BTS, emotionally and commercially, was partly built around his growth. Fans literally watched him grow up in real time. His voice changed on camera. His face changed on camera. His entire personality evolved publicly, and that vulnerability created one of the most intense parasocial bonds in modern pop culture history. Hybe knew this. They leveraged it. They built entire content strategies around watching Jungkook grow. But here's the thing about growing: eventually, you grow past the container. And Jungkook's dream, the one that started quietly and then got impossible to ignore, wasn't just about making music. It was about making his music. On his terms. With his aesthetic. His production choices. His visual direction. His tattoos, and yes, those tattoos matter more than people realize in this context, because in the Korean idol industry, visible tattoos are still considered a significant deviation from the clean, approachable image that companies carefully craft for their artists. Jungkook didn't just get tattoos. He got a sleeve. A full-arm sleeve that he initially covered during broadcast appearances, then stopped covering, then started displaying with zero apology. That progression, that slow, deliberate shedding of the image restrictions, is not accidental. That's a man communicating something. And what he was communicating was, I am deciding what this looks like now. Fast forward to his solo era, specifically the 7 period, and everything that followed. 7 wasn't just a hit song, it was a statement. Debuting with a collaboration with Latto, going for an unapologetically Western pop R&B sound, styling himself in a way that was miles away from the polished idol aesthetic, performing on stages that positioned him not as BTS's Jungkook, but as simply Jungkook, an international solo artist with his own identity, his own fan base, his own lane. The song hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. The first Korean solo artist to do that. Let that sink in. Not a group effort. Not a BTS track with BTS's collective fanbase pulling it across the finish line. A solo release from one member, hitting the peak of the most competitive music chart on the planet. Hybe celebrated publicly. Of course they did. But internally, that achievement created a very complicated conversation. Because when one member can hit #1 on the Hot 100 without the group, what does that mean for the group's leverage as a negotiating tool? What does that mean for the other members' solo trajectories? What does that mean for the collective Hybe-BTS economic relationship, which has always been based on the idea that the sum is greater than the parts? Jungkook just proved that one part alone can be world-conquering. And his dream goes even further than chart performance. People close to his creative process have spoken carefully, diplomatically, but clearly about Jungkook's desire to have full creative control over not just his music, but his visual identity, his video direction, his live performance concepts, and most significantly, his business positioning. He doesn't just want to be the artist. He wants to understand the architecture. He wants to know how the machine works so that he can decide whether he wants to operate inside it or build his own. That curiosity, that ambition dressed up in a leather jacket and a guitar riff, is exactly what makes boardrooms nervous. Hybe's entire model depends on artists being extraordinary performers who trust the infrastructure. The moment an artist becomes extraordinary and starts asking sharp questions about how the infrastructure works, who benefits, and whether it can be redesigned, the model is under pressure. And Jungkook, with his golden voice and his 50 million Instagram followers and his proven ability to move global markets, isn't asking those questions timidly. He's asking them with the quiet confidence of someone who already knows the answer. His military service gave him time to think. And if there's one thing that's more powerful than Jungkook performing, it's Jungkook thinking. Because when he comes back fully, with everything he's been building internally during that period of silence, the version of Jungkook that walks out isn't going to fit in any box Hybe designed for him. And they know it. They've always known it. The golden magne grew up. And now the gold belongs to him. #5, Jimin, the dream that was too honest for the industry. Here's a question that sounds simple, but goes very, very deep. What happens when an artist whose entire career has been built on perfection decides that perfection is the thing he wants to walk away from? Not because he's given up. Not because he's tired. But because he's finally brave enough to want something real instead. That's the Jimin story. And it's one of the most quietly radical transformations in the entire history of the Korean entertainment industry, because it happened in plain sight, in front of millions of people, and most of those people were so dazzled by the performance that they almost missed the revolution happening underneath it. Park Jimin came into BTS as a contemporary dance major from Busan Arts High School, a kid who was so technically gifted that his teachers reportedly cried when he chose to pursue idol training instead of classical performance arts. That detail alone should tell you something about the level of raw talent we're dealing with. But the idol industry doesn't reward raw talent. It rewards packaged talent. And Hybe, at the time still big hit, was very good at the packaging. Jimin became, arguably, the most visually iconic member of BTS. His performances were surgical in their precision, emotionally devastating in their impact, and commercially reliable in a way that made him one of the most valuable live performance assets the company had. The fan response to his stage presence was almost neurological. People would describe watching him perform as an out-of-body experience. Choreographers wanted to work with him. Directors wanted to shoot him. And Hybe, naturally, was very happy to keep the machine running at that frequency. But Jimin had a dream that the machine wasn't built to process. His dream wasn't about bigger stages or more fans or higher chart positions, though all of those things happened anyway, because the universe has a sense of irony. His dream was about emotional truth. About making art that didn't flinch. About putting his actual interior life, the anxiety, the self-doubt, the years of brutal self-criticism, the complicated relationship with his own image, into music that didn't apologize for being messy. And in the Korean idol industry, messy is a liability. The entire system is designed to smooth out the messy parts, to sand down the rough edges, to present a finished, polished, optimized version of the artist that maximizes audience affection and minimizes corporate risk. When Jimin sat down to create Face, his debut solo album released in March 2023, he wasn't just making music. He was staging an intervention on his own carefully constructed public image. Face was not the Jimin that Hybe built. Face was the Jimin that existed before the training, during the training, underneath the training, the one who lay awake at night genuinely questioning whether he was good enough, whether he belonged, whether the version of himself that the world loved was actually him or just a very convincing performance of him. The album opened with a track literally called Face Off and moved through a sequence of emotional states that were almost confrontationally personal. And then came Like Crazy, a song that hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became a genuine global pop moment, not because it was a safe commercial calculation, but because it was specific. Emotionally specific in a way that mainstream pop rarely allows itself to be. The specificity is what hit people. The vulnerability of it. And that vulnerability was exactly what made the executives nervous, because vulnerability at that scale is unpredictable. You can't A/B test vulnerability. You can't market research your way into emotional authenticity. Jimin essentially bet that if he was honest enough, the world would respond, and he was right, spectacularly right, but being right in a way that bypasses the conventional commercial formula is, paradoxically, one of the most threatening things an artist can do within a corporate system. Because it proves that the formula isn't necessary. And if the formula isn't necessary, then the people who control the formula have less leverage. But Jimin's dream goes beyond the music itself, into territory that genuinely made Hybe's strategic planners sit up straight. He's been vocal, never aggressively, never combatively, but with that particular clarity that comes from someone who has thought very carefully about what they're saying, about wanting to be involved in the full creative process. Not just performing the vision, but originating it, conceptualizing it, directing it, being the author of the entire experience rather than the most beautiful piece inside someone else's frame. His work with director Yoongi on the Face visual content showed flashes of what that full authorship could look like. The visual language was more personal, more cinematic, more willing to sit in discomfort than anything Hybe's standard visual team would have approved on its own. And the reception was extraordinary. Critics who had previously categorized Jimin strictly as a performer started using words like auteur and creative director. That shift in language matters enormously in an industry where categories determine contracts. When an artist who is signed as a performer starts being recognized as a creative director, the original terms of that relationship become subject to renegotiation. Jimin knows this. He's not naive. Behind that gentle smile and those impossibly precise dance moves is a man who has been studying the architecture of this industry for over a decade and has very clear ideas about where he fits and where he doesn't. His dream is to occupy a space that doesn't quite exist yet in the Korean entertainment landscape, the space between idol and independent artist, where he retains the infrastructure support of a major label while exercising the creative sovereignty of an independent one. That's not a dream that Hybe has a template for. And when you're a company built on templates, someone asking for something that doesn't fit the existing ones isn't just a creative challenge. It's an operational crisis wrapped in a perfectly executed stage performance. Number 4, Taehyung, the dream that refused to be categorized. There's a specific kind of genius that the entertainment industry genuinely doesn't know how to handle, and it's not the loud kind. Not the kind that announces itself with press releases and power moves. It's the quiet, deeply internal kind that operates on its own frequency, that produces things so singular and so unexpected that even the people who are supposed to manage it are left standing in the hallway wondering what exactly just happened. Kim Taehyung V of BTS, the man with the baritone that sounds like it was borrowed from a different century, and the visual presence of a Renaissance painting that somehow learned to dance, is that kind of genius. And his dream, the one that Hybe has been carefully navigating around like it's a piece of priceless and slightly unpredictable art, is perhaps the most philosophically disruptive of all the members because it doesn't fit into any existing commercial category. And in an industry where category determines strategy, that's a genuine crisis. Let's go back to basics for a second, because context matters enormously here. Taehyung grew up in Daegu, in a relatively modest household, and from a very young age, he was the kind of kid who looked at the world differently. Not quirky for attention differently. Genuinely, authentically, almost helplessly differently. He played the saxophone. He was obsessed with Van Gogh. He could talk for hours about film composition and color theory and the emotional architecture of a well-shot scene. He was, by every available piece of evidence, someone who was going to make art one way or another. The only question was what form that art would take. The Korean idol industry gave him a very specific form. And for years, he executed within that form with a level of brilliance that consistently exceeded everyone's expectations. His performance of Stigma on the You Never Walk Alone album era is still studied in vocal coaching circles for its emotional range and technical restraint. His visual contribution to BTS's aesthetic DNA, the way he moves, the way he wears clothes, the way he inhabits a frame, is something fashion houses noticed before Hybe fully understood what they had. Celine noticed. Valentino noticed. These aren't brands that give global ambassador deals to people they see as temporary commercial opportunities. These are brands that invest in artists who they believe will define an era. And that's the key word, artist. Not idol. Not entertainer. Artist. Taehyung's dream, articulated most clearly in the period leading up to and following his solo debut with Layover in 2023, is to be recognized and to operate as a complete, multidisciplinary artist in the classical sense of the term. We're talking about someone who wants to make music that doesn't chase trends, direct visual projects with his own cinematic language, act in films that demand genuine dramatic range, engage with the fine art world as a participant rather than a celebrity guest, and build a public identity that is entirely his own authorship rather than a collaborative construction between him and a corporate marketing team. Layover was the opening statement of that vision. And it was audacious in its quietness. In an era where solo K-pop debuts are expected to deliver high-energy bangers, chart-ready hooks, and visuals designed for maximum algorithmic impact, Taehyung dropped a jazz-influenced, unhurried, deeply atmospheric album that sounded like a late-night conversation in a dimly lit Paris cafe. It was not what Hybe's commercial playbook would have recommended. It was not optimized for streaming algorithms. It did not feature the kinds of features or production names that generate guaranteed chart performance. It was simply and completely what Taehyung wanted to make. And it debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200. Let that land for a moment. A quiet, jazz-influenced Korean album by a solo artist debuted at number 2 on the most competitive album chart in the world. Not because of strategic commercial engineering. Because of the sheer gravitational pull of an artist who made something true. But here's where Hybe's internal alarm system really started going off, and this is the part that doesn't make the headlines, but absolutely makes the boardroom conversations. Taehyung's vision extends significantly beyond music. His dream involves film. Real film. Not idol-adjacent acting, not the kind of soft-focus romantic lead roles that are typically offered to male idols as a brand extension exercise. He wants complex, morally ambiguous, dramatically demanding roles that require an actor to show up without the protection of his idol persona. He's spoken about directors he admires in a way that makes it clear he has studied their work deeply, not casually, not as a fan, but as someone who is analyzing craft with the intention of eventually operating in that space. The South Korean film industry, post-Parasite, is one of the most globally respected creative ecosystems on Earth. And Taehyung wants in. Not as a celebrity cameo. As an actor. His involvement in the acting program at Global Cyber University, his careful cultivation of relationships with serious filmmakers, his public expressions of admiration for work that is miles away from mainstream commercial entertainment. All of this adds up to a picture of someone who is actively building the credentials to operate in spaces that Hybe has very limited experience managing. Because Hybe is extraordinarily good at managing idol careers. They are significantly less equipped to navigate the world of serious, dramatic film, where the cultural gatekeepers are different, the timelines are different, the success metrics are different. And the kind of public persona that serves an idol can actually work against an actor trying to be taken seriously. Taehyung knows this tension. He thinks about it constantly. And his dream, to dissolve that tension by becoming something that transcends both categories, requires him to move in ways that HYB's existing structures were simply not designed to accommodate. There's also the fashion dimension, which sounds superficial until you understand what it actually represents. Taehyung's relationship with Celine and with the broader luxury fashion world isn't just a brand deal, it's a positioning statement. In the luxury fashion world, brand ambassadors are chosen for their cultural meaning, not just their follower count. The decision to align Taehyung with Celine is a statement about who Taehyung is as a cultural figure, someone associated with artistic sophistication, with a kind of timeless, category-defying elegance that luxury houses spend decades trying to cultivate. That positioning gives Taehyung leverage and credibility in creative worlds that operate completely independently of HYB's influence. And when an artist starts accumulating credibility in spaces where their management company has no authority, the management company has a very fundamental problem. The dream that made HYB panic isn't one single statement Taehyung made. It's the accumulation of everything he's been quietly building, the artistic identity, the fashion credibility, the film ambition, the musical vision, into a complete picture of a person who is, piece by piece, constructing a version of himself that doesn't need the idol industry to be extraordinary. He was always extraordinary. He just needed the time and the courage to make sure the world could see it on his terms. Number 3, J-Hope, the dream that rewrote what's possible. Let's talk about a moment that stopped the entire music industry in its tracks, not metaphorically, not in the hyperbolic way that entertainment journalists use to describe a mildly surprising chart performance, but literally. A moment where people who had spent decades in the live music business, people who had booked stages for the Rolling Stones and Beyoncé and Kendrick Lamar, looked at each other and said, out loud, on record, that they had never seen anything like this before. That moment was young Hoseok, J-Hope of BTS, headlining Lollapalooza in Chicago on July 31st, 2022. And the dream that led to that moment, the dream that made HYB's strategic planning team simultaneously proud and deeply, fundamentally unsettled, is one of the most important stories in the entire BTS universe. Because it wasn't just about a performance. It was about what that performance proved. And what it proved changed the calculation on everything. To understand why J-Hope's dream is so seismically significant, you have to understand what J-Hope was supposed to be inside the BTS narrative. He was the main dancer, the mood maker, the son of the group, the member whose relentless positivity and explosive stage energy served as an emotional anchor for the entire team. In promotional materials, in variety content, in fan-facing communication, J-Hope was consistently positioned as the energy source, the one who kept everyone's spirits up, the one who made the difficult moments bearable, the one whose smile could diffuse any tension in any room. That's a valuable role. It's also, if you're not careful, a limiting one. Because when an industry decides you are the energy source, they sometimes forget to ask what you need your energy for, what you're building toward, what you're dreaming about when the cameras aren't rolling and the performance face is finally put away. J-Hope's dream, the one he'd been carrying for years before it became a global news story, was to be recognized as a serious hip-hop artist. Full stop. Not a dancer who raps. Not the hype man in a global pop group. Not the one who makes everyone smile on variety shows. A serious, credible, globally respected hip-hop artist whose work stands on its own merits, independent of his group affiliation, independent of the K-pop category, independent of any qualifier that would position his artistry as secondary or derivative. And in the Korean entertainment industry, that dream is almost structurally impossible. Because the idol system is designed to create artists who are associated with their group first and themselves second, and for very good commercial reasons, because the group identity is what drives the fandom economics, the streaming numbers. The merchandise sales, the concert ticket revenue. Individual artistic credibility that exists completely independently of the group is, from a pure business perspective, a kind of asset leakage. It's value that exists outside the container. Value that Hybe can't fully capture. Jack in the Box, his solo album released in July 2022, was the opening declaration of that dream made real. And it was nothing like what anyone expected. This was not a safe, commercially optimized solo debut designed to appeal to the existing ARMY fanbase and generate predictable streaming numbers. Jack in the Box was dense, dark, lyrically complex hip-hop that engaged seriously with themes of identity, artistic authenticity, and the psychological cost of living inside a manufactured image. The production choices were deliberately underground in their aesthetic, not polished for mainstream consumption, not smoothed out for international audiences who might be encountering hip-hop for the first time. It was music that said, "I know who I am, I know where I come from musically, and I am not diluting this for anyone." The track More, the lead single, was almost confrontationally raw. Produced in a style that referenced American trap and alternative hip-hop, lyrically self-aware in a way that made it clear this was an artist processing something real, not performing contentment for an audience that expected contentment. And Hybe, while fully supporting the release commercially, had to sit with the reality that this project was not something they had generated. This was not the product of their creative infrastructure. This was J-Hope making something from the inside of himself outward, with the company's resources, but not their creative fingerprints. And then came Lollapalooza. When J-Hope was announced as the headliner of one of the world's most prestigious music festivals, not a K-pop festival, not an Asian music event, but Lollapalooza, the same festival that had hosted headliners like Eminem, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and Billie Eilish, the reaction was immediate and polarized. Some people in the music industry were genuinely excited, recognizing a cultural moment in the making. Others were skeptical in ways that carried an uncomfortable undertone, questioning whether a K-pop artist could hold a Western festival audience without the support of his group. J-Hope answered that question for approximately 70,000 people in Grant Park, Chicago, and for millions more watching the live stream. His performance was not a K-pop showcase. It was not a greatest hits parade from the BTS catalog. It was a fully realized hip-hop festival set, with live band elements, guest appearances, impeccable stagecraft, and the kind of commanding presence that makes an audience of strangers become believers in real time. People who went to Lollapalooza that day without knowing who J-Hope was came away as fans, not because of the BTS connection, but because of what they witnessed from him, specifically. That's headliner energy. That's not something that can be manufactured or managed. That's an artist operating at a frequency that the festival circuit recognizes and responds to regardless of genre or nationality. But here's the part that genuinely complicated things at Hybe headquarters. The Lollapalooza performance didn't just prove that J-Hope could do it. It proved that he'd always been capable of this, and that the group framework, for all its brilliance and commercial power, had been containing an artist who was operating well below his individual ceiling. That's a deeply uncomfortable realization for a company to sit with. Because if J-Hope's individual ceiling is this high, the question becomes, how high are all of them? What are they each capable of when the group dynamic is removed and each person is given full space to operate on their own terms? J-Hope's military service, during which he served as a public service worker due to an ankle injury, gave him more time to develop that individual vision. And the music he's been building, the artistic identity he's been refining, the connections he's been making in the global hip-hop community during and around his service period. All of it points toward a post-military J-Hope who is going to arrive at a level that the K-pop category genuinely cannot contain. His dream wasn't to leave BTS. His dream was to expand the definition of what a BTS member can be. And in doing so, he expanded what Korean artists can be in global music spaces. Hybe should be celebrating. And they are. But they're also doing the math on what it means when your artist's individual trajectories start generating cultural authority that operates independently of anything you built. Because cultural authority, unlike streaming royalties, is extremely difficult to share. Number 2, Suga, the dream that almost wasn't allowed to exist. There are moments in music history where you can point to a single decision, a single piece of work, a single statement of intent, and say, that is where everything changed. Not gradually, not slowly over time, but in one deliberate, irreversible moment where an artist drew a line in the sand and said, this is who I actually am, and I am no longer asking for permission to be it. For Yoongi, Suga of BTS, Agust D, the man who rewrote every rule about what a Korean idol is allowed to say, feel, and create, that moment has happened multiple times. And each time, it sent ripples through Hybe that were felt all the way to the executive floor. Because Suga's dream isn't just ambitious. It's philosophically incompatible with several core assumptions of the idol entertainment industry. And the fact that he pursued it anyway, with the quiet, relentless determination of someone who made up his mind a long time ago and simply never looked back, makes his story one of the most extraordinary and quietly radical in modern music. Let's go all the way back to the beginning, because Suga's origin story is not the glossy narrative that idol biopics are made of. He grew up in Daegu, in financial difficulty, in a family that did not have the resources to support an artistic dream that had no guaranteed return. He worked a part-time job delivering food on a motorbike in the harsh Korean winter to save money for recording equipment. He wrote music at night because it was the only time he had. He was rejected by companies. He nearly gave up. And then Big Hit took him, but only barely, and with significant conditions about the kind of artist he would be allowed to present himself as. The early BTS years required Suga to function within a framework that was deliberately commercial, deliberately optimized for mass appeal, deliberately constructed to minimize anything that might alienate a mainstream audience. And Suga, being the professional and the teammate that he is, operated within that framework and made it extraordinary. His rap work within BTS, the Cypher series, his verses on songs like Mic Drop and Dionysus showed glimpses of an artist with a technical sophistication and a lyrical intensity that went far beyond what the idol framework typically demands. But glimpses were all the framework allowed. And then came Agust D. The mixtape released in 2016 for free, with no commercial apparatus around it, no promotional campaign, no choreography video, was the most important piece of music Yoongi had released to that point. Not because it was the most successful commercially, because it was the most honest. Tracks like The Last went places that Korean idol music had genuinely never gone before: clinical depression, OCD, social phobia, the psychological violence of the idol training system, the alienation of fame, the terror of losing yourself inside a persona that the public loves and you can barely recognize. This was not inspirational content. This was not the kind of music that gets played in Hybe's official promotional reels. This was a person tearing open his own chest and showing you what was inside. And the response was global, immediate, and so profound that it fundamentally changed the conversation about what K-pop artists are allowed to talk about publicly. Hybe said nothing publicly negative about the mixtape. How could they? But internally, the questions it raised were significant and uncomfortable. If your artist releases music this raw, this unfiltered, this explicitly critical of aspects of the industry that your company is part of, what does that mean for your public positioning? What does that mean for the thousands of trainees in your system who might now feel emboldened to demand the same kind of expressive freedom? What does that mean for your relationship with other entertainment companies who have very strong opinions about artists discussing the darker side of the idol system? D1 and D-Day, the subsequent Agust D releases in 2022 and 2023, escalated the vision significantly. D-Day in particular was a full album and a global solo tour that positioned Suga not as a BTS member doing a solo project, but as an independent artist with a complete creative universe of his own. The D-Day tour sold out arenas across North America, South America, Asia, and beyond. The documentary series Suga, Road to D-Day, released on Disney+, gave audiences an unprecedented look inside the creative process and, more significantly, inside the mind of an artist who thinks about music industry and artistic integrity in ways that are genuinely uncommon at any level of the music business. But Suga's dream, the one that really, genuinely, structurally unsettles Hybe, isn't primarily about his own performing career. It's about production. About being recognized and operating as one of the great music producers of his generation. Full stop. With all the creative authority and industry positioning that title carries. He doesn't want to be a rapper who produces his own albums. He wants to be a producer, the architect, the one in the room who shapes the sound of an era, who also happens to perform. That distinction matters enormously because producers operate in a completely different power structure than performers. Producers own publishing. Producers build catalogs. Producers accumulate creative leverage that compounds over decades in ways that performance careers simply cannot match. And Suga, who has production credits on records that have generated billions of streams, who has co-written and co-produced some of the biggest songs in BTS's catalog, who has demonstrated a musical instinct that is both commercially sophisticated and artistically serious, is clearly building toward that role. His work on IU's People PT2, a collaboration that was talked about in South Korean music circles as a landmark creative moment, gave a preview of what a fully producer-positioned Suga could mean to the broader Korean music ecosystem, completely outside the BTS commercial framework. His work with international artists, his deepening relationships with the global music production community, his clearly deliberate accumulation of production credits and songwriting credits that don't depend on the BTS brand for their value. All of this is the construction of a second career identity that Hybe has limited ability to control or contain. And then there's the shoulder. Suga's shoulder injury, which required surgery and a lengthy rehabilitation period that significantly complicated his military service options and ultimately led to serving as a social service worker, is part of the story in a way that's rarely discussed honestly. Because that injury forced a period of genuine stillness that Suga used to go even deeper into production work. When you physically cannot perform at the level your body used to be capable of, you invest more completely in the craft that doesn't require your body, the craft of making other people's music extraordinary. The shoulder injury didn't slow Suga down. It redirected him. And the direction it pointed him in is one where he needs Hybe's infrastructure significantly less than the performer version of him does. A world-class music producer with a proven track record and a global network can operate from any studio on Earth. A Korean idol performer is tied to a very specific commercial and cultural ecosystem. Suga's dream is to be the former. And he's been building toward it, quietly and methodically, for years. Hybe knows this. They've known it for a long time. And the way they've navigated it, the careful balance of giving Suga enough creative freedom to keep him engaged while trying to maintain the commercial frameworks that depend on his participation in the BTS collective, is one of the most delicate management acts in the modern music industry. Because you can't suppress someone this talented. You can only try to make sure that when he builds his empire, it's at least partially inside your walls. Number 1 RM. The dream that shook the entire foundation. If you've been following this list and you're surprised that Kim Namjoon, RM, the leader of BTS, the architect of everything, is sitting at number 1, then you haven't been paying close enough attention. Because everything we've talked about with the other members, the creative independence, the authorship, the desire to transcend categories, the refusal to be contained by commercial frameworks, all of that finds its most complete, most articulate, most structurally threatening expression in the dream of one specific human being who has been quietly, methodically, and with extraordinary intellectual precision, building towards something that Hybe never anticipated when they made him leader of. A 7-member idol group in 2013. The dream that made Hybe panic, genuinely, deeply, existentially panic, belongs to Kim Namjoon. And it's not what you think. It's not about leaving. It's not about lawsuits or contract disputes or public confrontation. It's something far more destabilizing than any of that. It's about legitimacy. Specifically, about redefining what counts as legitimate art, who gets to make it, and whether the Korean entertainment industry's most powerful company has any role to play in that conversation at all. Let's establish the foundation, because RM's story cannot be understood without understanding the specific kind of person he is, and that requires going back further than most people bother to go. Kim Namjoon was a genuinely exceptional student. Not idol exceptional, academically exceptional. Top 1% on national standardized testing. Taught himself English fluency from watching American sitcoms. Was reading philosophy, sociology, and art theory as a teenager in a way that most adults never do at any point in their lives. He chose idol training, or rather, idol training chose him, through a street casting, and for years, the intellectual machinery of his mind was deployed primarily in service of the BTS project. His lyrical contributions, his conceptual direction, his role as the member who communicated with international media before the rest of the team's English was strong enough. All of this was real. All of this was extraordinary. And all of this created a version of RM that the world knew and loved. But it was also, in retrospect, a fraction. A fraction of what Kim Namjoon's actual dream looked like when he was honest about it with himself, alone, in the hours between the performances and the schedules and the obligations. His dream, articulated with increasing clarity from around 2019 onward, and then with striking directness in the lead up to and following his solo debut, is to be recognized as a serious visual artist and cultural intellectual in the global art world. Not the music industry's version of that. Not the K-pop industry's version of that. The actual art world, museums, galleries, critical discourse, institutional recognition, where the gatekeepers have PhDs and the timelines span decades and commercial success is sometimes viewed with active suspicion rather than celebration. RM has been collecting art since his early 20s, not as a celebrity hobby, not as a status symbol, but as a genuine practice rooted in deep engagement with art history and contemporary art discourse. His collection includes works by Korean artists who were criminally underrepresented in international spaces, and his purchases, which he's spoken about publicly and thoughtfully, have demonstrably contributed to increased international interest in Korean contemporary art. He has visited hundreds of museums across the world, not on company-scheduled cultural tourism, but on his own time, often alone, often unannounced, taking notes, sitting with works for hours, writing about them internally in a way that reflects serious engagement rather than casual appreciation. And then came Indigo. Released in December 2022, Indigo was not just a solo album, it was a thesis statement. Structured explicitly as a conversation between RM and a carefully curated group of global artists across multiple disciplines, featuring collaborators from poetry, visual art, indie music, and jazz. Indigo was designed from the ground up to exist at the intersection of music and fine art. It was not optimized for streaming. It was not designed to generate viral moments. It was constructed as a document, the kind of work that you return to over years, that reveals new layers each time, that positions the person who made it within a tradition of serious artistic inquiry rather than commercial entertainment. The critical response was extraordinary. Not just within music criticism, within art criticism. Publications that do not typically cover K-pop were writing about Indigo in terms that placed it within a broader conversation about what contemporary art can look like when it operates across media. That crossover is almost entirely unprecedented for a Korean idol artist, and it did not happen by accident. It happened because RM spent years, quietly and deliberately, building credibility in spaces where HYB has no influence and no infrastructure. His relationship with the art world is now at a level where he's not a celebrity who likes art. He's a participant in the ecosystem. He's someone whose opinion on specific works, specific artists, specific movements carries genuine weight in conversations where his idol identity is essentially irrelevant. Museum directors know him. Curators consult him. Artists whose work he has championed have spoken publicly about the significance of his engagement, not because he's famous, but because his engagement is substantive. And this is where HYB's panic goes from background anxiety to genuine boardroom crisis. Because what RM is building, this identity as a serious global cultural intellectual with credibility in the fine art world, the literary world, and the critical music world, is an identity that operates completely outside the K-pop commercial structure. It doesn't need HYB's promotional infrastructure. It doesn't need the BTS brand. It doesn't need the fandom economy. In fact, in certain contexts, those associations are liabilities, Because the fine art world has complicated feelings about pop culture adjacency, and RM has to navigate carefully to maintain credibility in spaces where being a K-pop idol might undermine the seriousness of his artistic standing. His solo exhibitions, his speaking engagements at cultural institutions, his written reflections on art that circulate in academic and critical circles. All of this is RM operating in a world that Hybe literally cannot enter with him. Alright, you've made it through all 7. And now that the list is complete, let's zoom out because when you look at all 7 of these dreams side by side, something becomes undeniably clear. This was never just about 7 individual men wanting different things. This is about the collision between 2 completely different ideas of what a human being who makes art is supposed to be. Hybe built a system. A brilliant, extraordinarily successful, genuinely revolutionary system. One that took 7 young men from relative obscurity and transformed them into a global cultural phenomenon that broke records no one thought were breakable and opened doors for Korean art that had been closed for generations. That system deserves enormous credit. But systems are designed around what artists are at the beginning, not what they become. And what BTS became, individually and collectively, is something that no system designed in 2013 could have anticipated. 7 men. 7 dreams. 7 different versions of the same fundamental desire, to be real. To be whole. To be recognized not just as products of an extraordinary machine, but as full human beings whose inner lives and artistic visions are the actual point, not the raw material that the machine processes into revenue. Jin wants time and authorship. Jungkook wants creative ownership. Jimin wants emotional truth. Taehyung wants to refuse categorization entirely. J-Hope wants to be taken seriously in the rooms he always belonged in. Suga wants to build something that compounds across decades. And RM wants to leave something behind that cannot be measured in streams. None of these dreams are anti-Hybe. None of them are acts of rebellion or ingratitude. They are the inevitable result of putting extraordinary people into proximity with their own potential for long enough that they can finally see it clearly. Hybe panicked, not because the dreams were destructive, but because they were expansive. Larger than the container. More than the machine could hold. And that is, ultimately, the most beautiful kind of problem to have. Because it means you raised people who outgrew you. And if you're wise enough to celebrate that instead of suppress it, the legacy you're left with is one that no single company could have built alone. BTS didn't just change music. They changed what artists are allowed to dream about. And that changes everything that comes after. Thanks for watching. If this hit different, you know what to do, like, subscribe, and drop in the comments whose dream surprised you the most. See you in the next one.